This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, we are talking with jazz musician and jazz music school owner, David Bloom. He's written a new book called What is Soul? And it is going to talk about soul and soulfulness. It has tons of interviews with people and talks about his teaching career and all this type of thing. I'm excited to learn all about it as someone who used to hang out in that world and do that sort of thing. So welcome, David, to the Cameron Journal Podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, welcome. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it?
Well, as you said, I've had a jazz music school for almost 50 years now. And what I've really tried to do with my students is to bring the soul out of each student that comes to the school. And soul, I'm not talking about the soul with a capital S. I'm talking about soul. Okay, the soul is something different. Okay, that theologists can talk about. Okay, but what I'm talking about basically is the potential that we have at our birth to be an individual and to be passionate about things. And in this case, with my school, it's been about music, but it really touches all other areas of life too. So that was kind of the, my impetus to write the book. And then what I did was we interviewed about 35 different people, from all walks of life, from 8th graders to Studs Terkel, who I think was about 88 when we interviewed him. So we have a very wide array of job descriptions and ages and points of view. And basically, I was trying to find out what people think about soul and soulfulness. And I got a really nice range of answers. So and originally I wanted to make this a documentary, and then I decided in the last 3 or 4 years just to do a book, because it was a little easier than doing a documentary.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's go back to the beginning, though. That's fascinating. Let's go back to the beginning, though. What made you start a jazz music school?
Well, I went to Berklee School of Music for a couple of years, and I got back to Chicago, and a lot of people wanted to study with me because they couldn't go to the school, and they wanted to find out, what I knew. So right away, I had about 30 students down in Hyde Park, which is on the south side of Chicago, where I live. And so that was kind of the beginning of my teaching. What was the second part of your question?
Oh, that was it. I just was wanting to know how you started the school and where you got inspiration for that. And now we know.
I come from a family of teachers. My father, his name was Benjamin Bloom, and he was pretty much the second or third, depending upon who you talk, leading education researcher in the world. Back in the 50s and 60s. So, and then my mother taught reading and tutoring. So I come from a family of teachers, and I think that what makes us tick is the success of our students. So if we see that a student that we have taught is doing very well, that is pretty much bona fide evidence of what we have inside ourselves that we've been able to successfully communicate to students.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. So what got you? You said you were going to want to do a documentary. You ended up doing a book. What got you wanting to catalog these experiences and the meaning of soul? What generated that idea?
Well, I think that for me, you know, I do a lot of different things that have to do with soul. I write music with soul titles. I just had a CD released a while back called Shadow of a Soul. And the idea of that is when I've met people who were very soulful, I always felt there was kind of a deep shadow that they cast versus people who I felt were less soulful. So, and I remember when I was a kid growing up, and I had a bar mitzvah when I was 13, and the rabbi, uh, I would used to go to his sermons, every Saturday because he was such a wise person and soulful. He had a certain sense of dignity for people, and so even though I didn't define him as soulful, I felt that was some of my early days, here on Earth, connecting with soulfulness. I also went to a theater called the Regal Theater in the mid '60s and saw all the Motown groups.
Mm.
So it was, and then after that, I went to a blues festival and saw Buddy Guy play, and I called him up the next day and asked him if he'd teach me, and he said he didn't teach, but I convinced him to give it a shot, and I studied with him for about a year.
No, that's quite impressive. Why did you go into? You said your parents were teachers. Why did you go into music?
Well, I had a I always loved music, whether it was rhythm and blues or jazz, and it just kind of made much more sense than much else of reality. When I heard great music, it 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 put order to a lot of crazy stuff that I was seeing out here, out in the world, and it was kind of a much more civilized and socialized reality. Like when
No,
I when
that
I
makes
when I would
sense.
go hear great musical groups, I felt that the really good ones were a statement of democracy. Everybody had their role to play, and that you know, everybody had an important role to play and they were respected by the rest of the band. So that was I always noticed that in great bands, whether I saw, Miles Davis's group in the '60s, or Art Blakey, or, you know, different gospel, Walter Hawkins singers. I just felt there was just a lot of respect in the air for the others that were making the music.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of funny you mentioned about it being kind of more ordered because jazz, especially some of the late 20th century stuff, is so deconstructed and doesn't seem to follow any sort of rules and just seems to kind of be really out there. And a lot of people, I think, feel like that's very off-putting, almost kind of like, oh my God, what is this noise? Um, so I think that's interesting. What is it about
I agree
jazz
with
that
all. Pardon me, but I
Yeah.
agree. I agree with a lot of them. I think that a lot of jazz, as well as other performance art, is very self-celebratory. It's just celebrating technique, or basically just it's kind of empty. I don't hear a story. I don't hear uh, I don't hear a reason for it to be, other than people's egos playing. And I thoroughly agree with you about, at the end of the last century, a lot more free jazz was happening. And for some people, I think when they hear that disorder, it just makes them feel more at home, because
Mm.
their lives they feel disorder.
Yeah, it's something that I think is just, I think for a lot of people, and I don't know if you agree with this, a lot of people think jazz is so inaccessible now. It's just, it's too confusing, it's too long, it's too hard to understand. What do you think about all that?
I very much agree with it. I think that if you listen to the top jazz musicians, you hear storytelling. So that basically what I call non-musicians, I call them civilians. So civilians can make sense of it, because they hear the sounds are connected to kind of a story that means something. For example, I'll give you just a simple little story that you might hear, like a blues player play.
Mm.
Blues player might go in da 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 be ba do da. So you hear syntax and grammar. You hear a question, da 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 ba dee ba do da. So there's a connectivity, and I think when you miss that connectivity, uh, it really almost kind of cuts down on what people can imagine. If you hear very good phrasing, you can imagine people talking. It's a conversation. But when you have notes that have no linguistic analog, yeah, it's like it really it doesn't mean anything. And I'm constantly complaining about jazz, self indulgence. Where people just think, if I'm playing, I'm telling a story, and I just don't buy that. If someone's just playing a barrage of notes, I don't hear a story.
No, that requires some artistry and some communication,
Right,
some real communication that is oftentimes, I think, not present in some of the more exotic stuff.
right.
So that's, yeah. So how did you grow up playing music as a child in school, or did you take to it later?
Yeah, when I was 9 years old, I studied with the first chair clarinetist of the Chicago Symphony.
Oh.
And he was a super tough guy, and I didn't really like, studying with him. And then my family moved to California a few months later. My father was doing a 1 year sabbatical at the Center for the Advanced Studies of Behavioral Science.
Hmm.
And so when I was in California, when I was 9, I started taking some folk guitar lessons. Folk was huge, back in the, 50s and 60s. So I learned how to play folk guitar, and I would play guitar and sing songs with my brother. All these Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Gibson and Camp, and Clancy Brothers. So that's kind of the beginning. And then when I got back to Chicago, I started listening. I forgot the exact way that I heard, the first jazz stuff. Oh no, now I remember. Yeah, we moved when we got back from California. We moved to another street, and across the street there was a guy named Jerry Fentress, and I heard Herbie Mann live at the Village Gate, booming out of his window, and I yelled up. And back in those days, people were way less uptight than they are now. He invited
Mhm.
me to come up. He said, "Come on up." And so he played some jazz for me for about an hour, and I just fell in love with it. And again, the music he played had what you and I both agree is missing now, which is a lot of coherence, coherence, storytelling, and also vulnerability. I think a lot of people these days, like the idea of having intimacy if it's one way. In other words, they want the audience to love them, but they don't really want to show the goods. And back in the day, I thought the artists really would show their souls. I mean, they would show vulnerability, and you don't get it both ways. If you really, if you are not vulnerability, then it shows that you really don't care. Caring means that you're vulnerable. If you don't care, you're not vulnerable.
Yeah, that's that's where I was going. That's where I was going next. You beat me to it. What's your favorite interview from the book?
Oh, there's that's a tough one, but I really like the one with Blanche Manning, who was a federal judge, and there was a murder case. They had a certain amount of circumstantial evidence, um, but so she was in on. She was I'm trying to remember her job at the time. She was working for the prosecutor. I forgot her position, but the when it came to sentencing, they wanted to go for the death penalty, and she said she wouldn't do it. She just felt something, that wasn't right, and then a year later, she got a phone call saying that the person was wrongfully convicted, and someone else did the murder.
Hmm.
So, and she said she felt that that was kind of an indication of her soul. She just felt something that was really a strong feeling, So I like that story. That was a pretty good one.
No, that definitely, oh, definitely is a good one. What do you think about today's crop of music students? Are you impressed? Are they not so great? How's the state of music education in our country?
Well, I think the it goes back to this whole storytelling, and I think that a lot of kids now have prodigious technique. That's one of the important things to them. But I don't think storytelling is that important. I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying many that I hear. I hear a lot of empty technique. People playing fast for the sake of playing fast without playing fast ideas. It's a big difference. So
Yeah.
I think there's a huge amount of technical talent and not that much um, artistic storytelling going on. At least what I hear.
No, no, I think it's interesting you say that because I was always impressed by well, two people. I studied with a great guy in Denver named Mark Harris who used to play with a band called Devachka, and they were locally popular in the Denver area. And I stayed with him for a long while. He taught me to play music by ear, which I didn't really know how to do. And and then my mother had a bass clarinet teacher named Donald Ambler, and he played with everybody. Name a famous musician, especially jazz, and he had played with them, for them, been in their show, whatever have you. And and Donald Ambler he was in his 70s when I was in high school, so he's long past. But I'm sorry, those guys were just built different. No, the thing with like Donald Ambler was not only was his technique exquisite, like just like you could sit and listen to him play for hours and never get bored. Like there was just something about like that generation that was just built so different. And whatever it was, you don't see it very much today.
I think one thing you're talking about here, at least in the way I describe it, is that you hear reverence for the music. that is bigger than reverence for an ego. So when you hear people who have that kind of magic about them, they hold music above their own ego. I think I bifurcate the world into people who, whatever they're doing, hold some idea or some category of ideas bigger than their ego. Because I think when you reduce everything to your ego, there's not a lot of meat on the bone anymore.
Yeah. Well, and I think also there's a lot of, I mean, are you really doing it for other people? Are you just doing it for yourself? And, do you care about audience experience? And, what are you giving to people? Or are they just showing up to watch you show off? Very different energies.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think well put. That's. I think though. I think you can be doing stuff to express yourself, but you're very cognizant of how people are responding, to it. Because if you love music and you realize that no one is responding really to your music, then maybe you need to rethink some things, because maybe maybe you're not including any of the values that the audience has, so that when you play, it doesn't have anything to do with their world. And I think of a lot of avant-garde music, um, fails that way because it doesn't have any shared worldview that I think great music has. You know, just playing a great melody. Yeah. What instrument do you play, by the way?
Flute. I
Oh,
grew up playing classical flute. Yeah.
oh, okay, great. Did
Yeah.
you did you use the Moyes book?
Um, I did. I also studied Suzuki method. I didn't do the whole Suzuki program. That's a whole thing. But I did. I also started out very famous flautist in the 50s. I can see the cover of the book, can't think of his name. And yeah, it was a fun ride. Ultimately my music community didn't embrace me the way I thought they would, and it didn't end up working out the way I thought it would. So I left that behind and started to write. And but yeah, it was a fun ride to do bands and youth orchestras, and I grew up in church, so I was singing and playing in that environment and all this type of thing. Um, and yeah, it was a very difficult, difficult but rewarding journey for sure.
Oh,
I think
if you do
everybody should have a chance to do that.
if you do get a chance, there's a tune that you may want to use with this on YouTube. It's called "Shadow of a Soul," and with my name. And it's a really beautiful production with strings, and it's a about 20 strings are on it, and it's a pretty, sounds kind of like a movie score for a great movie. So if you get a chance, you might want to check that out.
I will. I will definitely. Yeah, I think that's why one of the things that I'm always passionate about, that I'm kind of sad is getting cut, is arts education in schools. You know, there are so many. It's like, if you want live music in 20 years, you have to support, an 8-year-old who is murdering an instrument today. Like, that's how that works. And I feel like that's one of the things that we're kind of losing in our society now.
Right. And it's also interesting just to take a look at the effect you know that AI is having on everything, on the arts and music. And it's a very interesting time that we're living through right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, I think a lot of that, especially with like AI and all that type of thing, I think we're going to end up with people, and we're kind of already seeing it now, using those tools to do more faster. But this is already true in my business, the publishing business, is people are using AI to write, but they're not telling any story. They don't have compelling characters. They're just kind of like, oh, let's have AI spit out some content and try to go publish in a science fiction magazine. And it's like, no,
Right.
that's not how this works. Like, it's like anybody can put words on a page. It's so easy, a computer can do it. But telling a story, trying to say something, have a voice, AI can't do that. I
Right.
don't know that it will ever be able to do that. And I think there's a lot of technologically obsessed people who don't have a lot of natural artistic talent that feel like and finally have a technology where they can bully their way into art spaces, and the rest of us are kind of like, not so fast. There was a sci-fi magazine that shut down submissions because they were getting bombarded with AI written submissions, and they're just like, we're not reading anybody until we figure out a way to filter this stuff out.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I'm kind of like, yeah, like the technology behind music has come so far, especially with sampling and the way production is now, and all the digital stuff that we didn't have back in the day. Um, but have we gotten any better at telling stories? Have we gotten any better at having a voice? Are we creating unique sounds that are iconic the minute you hear the first bar?
Right.
No. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
No, I think with the advent of all this tech stuff, I think people need to just kind of understand it more, because there's been an explosion in the last 25 years with the iPhones, and I think the iPhone's done huge damage to young kids, because I think it has prevented them from being well socialized. Because a lot of them just can't talk to anybody because they're so used to just looking at their phones.
well, that's where the socialization is happening now. It's messaging, it's it's in groups, it's happening on WhatsApp, it's happening in comment sections on TikToks, it's happening on Snapchat. It's not you know not the same way we socialized in the pre-smartphone era, that's for sure.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, for sure.
It's a very difficult thing. It's a very difficult thing. Well, this comes to the part of the show where we do plugs. So why don't you let us know where we can find the book and where we can keep interacting with you online?
Yeah, the book is on Amazon, and the name is What is Soul by David Bloom, Bloom.
Mhm.
And I have a site, whatissoul.com, that you know that uh, tells about the book, and that's about it.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And where are you located?
I'm here in Seattle.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
you been there?
8 years now.
You like it a lot out there?
I do. I do. I definitely enjoy being up here. It's a fun place, and we have a great music scene, have for decades, of course. And yeah, it's a lot of fun
Does it ever stop raining up there?
for about 3 or 4 months in the summer.
That's good. Well,
Yeah,
I really appreciate you having me,
yeah,
and hope we can talk again sometime.
of course. Thank you so much. That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.